Jenny.
Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to Season 1, Episode 13 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
And we like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch. Nance, what's our book today?
It's Jane on the Brain by Wendy Jones. This book was suggested to us by our very first guest on the front porch, our beloved niece, Sarah Crawford. Sarah knows Wendy and thought that this would be a great book for us to review. Wendy's the author of this book, but she's also a therapist and an Austen scholar. So it's really interesting how she's combined those two areas of expertise. And this book was a New York Times New and Notable selection. Throughout the book, she cites research studies that have informed our current understanding of mind-brain science. And that's all the stuff that you love.
Oh my goodness. I am all over this book. I loved it. Jane Austen and neuroscience. Oh my gosh, I loved every page of this book. And I have been telling people about this book that I work with, colleagues that are mind, brain, knowledge people. And who isn't a Jane Austen fan?
Well, truly.
I just loved every single page of this book with all the neuroscience that is in it and then all the scrumptious heroines.
Yes.
I think I just read the book very slowly because every line is just filled with Austen and then the love of neuroscience and how the brain works. Oh my golly, Nancy, I have enjoyed this book so much. I know I'm blathering on. I hope I don't make a fool of myself in front of Wendy. I just loved this book. And you know, when I read Austen all those years ago, I didn't have the knowledge that I do now.
Yeah.
So I wasn't reading Jane's books from a clinical lens. I was reading it from romance and historical novel. I certainly had some background in sociology and kind of looked at it through that lens, certainly with the experiences of being a female. Now, having read this book, now that just brings so much more interest into these characters, which I adore. It makes me really appreciate Jane Austen too, when you can marry the mind-brain science and then combine that with these beautiful, deep characters and look at these characters through that lens. It just shows you how smart Jane Austen really was.
Oh, it's incredible that before we even had the language, Jane was observing and using those observations to create these characters that are people that we can relate to because we've seen them. They even hold up under a clinical microscope. I mean, it's really unbelievable.
It really is. Okay. I don't know if you have one or not, but what is your favorite Jane Austen book?
I think it has to be Pride and Prejudice because that is the book of hers I've reread the most number of times. I just love Darcy. I love Elizabeth. I love the family. I love how the sisters are so different. They're such individuals. And that's how it is in a family. You know, siblings are just so different one from another. Of course, the ending is just so romantic.
Oh,
how about you?
I love Pride and Prejudice. I love Sense and Sensibility. And I like Mansfield Park. So I would say it's kind of a toss-up. One of the themes in her books that really I like is the sisterly parts of her stories. And you are my beloved sister. And so when she talks about her beloved sisters and the relationship with these women, and, you know, she does talk about attachments between Mary Ann and Eleanor.
Yep.
And that's part of our relationship. I like those parts of our books. I like that it's kind of a female perspective, female relationships with, sisters. Fanny even has relationships there with her biological family, not her adopted families, and how important those relationships are to her and how she grieves the loss of those relationships when she is sent away.
Right.
What part impacted you the most about Wendy's book?
Okay, Lenny, I almost had to call you when I was reading this one section, the 3 kinds of attachment that she talks about. So she talks about secure attachment, preoccupied attachment, and dismissive attachment. And then she gave examples of each of those. So the first one is Eleanor from Sense and Sensibility. Somehow she experienced as a child a secure attachment with a primary caregiver. And as a result, she's very secure. She's able to regulate her emotions. She's kind of held up as the rational, reasonable one, but also someone who experiences deep emotions.
Right.
Marianne, her sister, experienced preoccupied attachment. And so that is demonstrated by when she meets Willoughby, she just attaches to him immediately. She throws caution to the wind. She focuses on him obsessively when he's not around. She's just a very anxious person when it comes to attachment. And then the third example is Darcy, and he is dismissively attached. He is emotionally distant and he thinks that intimacy is dangerous, even though he talks in generalities in very positive ways about his father. Mostly he doesn't ever talk about his mother. He says his father is a wonderful person, but clearly he is very emotionally distant. And so she was talking about all this, and she talks about the scales that people have developed to figure out what kind of attachment people have experienced when they were growing up, as well as the kind of attachment that they might be demonstrating as parents themselves.
Right.
This intergenerational transmission of attachment just really got me worked up. And then I'm going to read this section of the book that really got me worked up.
Nance.
I know, seriously. She is talking about the origins of the narcissistic personality disorder specifically, but she gives examples of what bad parenting is basically. Okay, here is the quote from her book. A toddler learning to walk might fall down and begins to cry. Instead of acknowledging the baby's distress, the caregiver tells the child he's all right and he's doing a great job walking. An older child might come to the caregiver upset because he lost the ball game. Instead of saying, "Oh, I know how you feel, losing is difficult," the caregiver says something along the lines of, "You just had an off day." When I was reading those examples, I said the wrong things. I don't think I did a good job acknowledging feelings.
Okay. I have seen you parent. You're a fantastic parent. Now we're looking at 2 examples here. We're looking at someone's emotional regulation. So you can't just take 2 sentences or 2 situations out of someone's life and say, that was wrong. There's good enough parenting. What she does is she even says that, first of all, I think you are a fantastic parent. And I think your son would even probably tell you that. I've studied these 3 a lot.
Oh, okay.
This is a very well-known strange study. It's a very well-known, very documented. There's a lot of truth in this. These attachments have survived and remained pretty stable, really, over the course of time. So I think you have to look at those as kind of broad tones, and they are scaled. So sometimes it's okay to look at your child and say, yep, you scraped your leg. You okay? And if they're like brushing themselves off and they run out to play, that's fine. But if they're crying and they need a hug and a Band-Aid and Batine or however you take care of those, then you would have attended to that too. And part of parenting and part of attachment is reading your child and attending to what their messages they're giving out. So whereas she gives examples of Marianne, who is parented by her mother, who probably has the same kind of attachment she does. They're both very emotional. And instead of supporting, acknowledging her, she kind of attaches to Marianne. They kind of get dysfunctional there.
Yeah.
They almost become enmeshed in their attachment to each other. So instead of helping her, she isn't reading her signals of what it is that she needs. She becomes
Yeah, she called that emotional contagion, right?
yeah, I think that was the word she used, which is great.
Yeah.
She gets sucked into it and she doesn't remain attached appropriately. So part of those little quips that you read, I think, are ignoring some of those other things that are going on. I think kids kind of help you learn how to parent them based on the messages that they're giving out. And that's what made me think of Marianne, because her mother wasn't parenting her. She loved her, of course, no one's ever saying that, but the way she was parenting her was creating problems for her because she wasn't attending to her and giving her what she needed.
We all emerge from childhood or even adolescence with different, maybe non functional ways of coping in certain situations, but our social brain can be repaired through positive, close relationships as adults. And they can be a sister relationship, like we see with Eleanor and Marianne. They can be our partners, friends. They can also be actual therapists. In retrospect, after reading this book, Jane Austen does do a beautiful job demonstrating that with Marianne and Eleanor, with Elizabeth and Darcy. And that is such a positive message. And it's true now that we know the psychology behind it and the neurons and how they work in the brain, that that is actually possible, which wasn't necessarily something people thought.
Right. And that just brings up so many other wonderful things that I want to talk to you about. It just explodes all these characters for me in such a unique way. I think of Elizabeth and her sister, Jane. As the sisters, they're attached to one another. I mean, they have a zany mother.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. She is an emotional basket case.
They have zany sisters.
They're younger sisters. I love how she brings in Darcy and Bingley into the ball and shows how two men, because of their attachments and how they were grown and personality, how they enter that space completely differently.
Yeah, that was so good.
And Bingley just enjoys it. And he has positiveness and he finds the love of his life. He's using higher brain skills. Poor Darcy's sitting at the bottom of the brain, acting kind of like a Neanderthal. His brain patterns aren't very developed yet. And through Elizabeth, of course, he develops other positive traits.
Right.
But this guy that he is with, he has already learned those things that Darcy hasn't. He is more complex in his brain waves, and through that whole part of the book, we can see how Darcy changes. And then as we see his character emerge from her perspective, you're seeing Darcy grow as a person. We're seeing him challenging some of the things and the ways that he was raised, and he is becoming a better person because Elizabeth called him out and basically said he was rude. And no, I'm not going to marry you. Why would I marry you? You're insulting. Which is such a great part of the book.
Yeah, that is a good part.
I just love that part too. I could go on and on, Nancy. I just thought all of this stuff was so great. I just loved it all.
What do you think impacted you the very most?
There was some newer stuff in there that I hadn't heard before. The tend and befriend. I thought that was very strong and very female, and I had never heard that.
Well, describe what that is.
That was just, the men were out hunting or doing whatever they were doing, and the women were basically home taking care of all the kids. Okay, so there's a bear that comes in to create havoc. And you've got all these kids. How are you going to fight a bear? You've got all these little kids that you have to take care of. And yes, women do fight and they will kill for their children. No doubt about it.
No doubt.
But if you can tend and befriend and get the other women to help you, then all of a sudden a couple of them can take the kids and run out the backwoods area and get them to safety while you and some of the other moms take on the bear. That's your fight and flight, and you will protect your children. So I liked that, and I liked the broader and build. And it's kind of the same kind of thing. And men can do this too, obviously. Get their guy friends around them and get them to help and have that sense of community around themselves, because we all know that men need other men too, and that they add to their lives too. But the broader and the build, getting a sense of community around you to help you. I thought those were really good principles.
Speaking of community, the one thing that I thought was just so tender and beautiful about how a small community works was her talking about Emma's father and Miss Bates. And they both have some real personality quirks that neither one of them really are able to get out of their own perspective in a very effective way. But Austen has them enjoying talking to each other. They're not really in dialogue with each other. They're each kind of only in dialogue with themselves. But it's just such a beautiful, tender way of saying, yeah, everyone has these personality quirks, but we can still connect with people and we can still find community as imperfect people.
Yes, we can.
I think that's beautiful.
And we can parent as imperfect people too, Nance. There's no perfect parent. There's no perfect attachment.
Yeah.
We had one child each, but there are often times when you have multiple children, you have to attend to this one while this one's crying with his knee skinned. You're diapering the baby. You know what I mean? And that one has to wait.
Yeah. Hey, Lenny, one of the things I really liked is how she explained what I think of as denial in Elizabeth's rejection of Darcy, and how she concurrently really embraced Wickham. And so she defines denial as missing or suppressing or distorting information that is available, including information about our own feelings and motives, which I think is really interesting. So she says when Darcy insults Elizabeth at the Meryton ball, saying she wasn't pretty enough, Elizabeth immediately from that point forward is very negative about Darcy because of her wounded pride, and that really sets it off on a negative trajectory.
Right. And she so easily accepts Wickham's feelings about Darcy.
Yes.
I'm thinking of Jane. I'm thinking of denial. I mean, Freud is well after Jane Austen's time. But denial is our most common defense mechanism. It is the most common, most used, and all of us use it all the time, whether we admit it or not. Yes, it is. I loved this part of it because dead on right. She was so interested in going to the Meryton ball. She was all over it, just like her sisters, just like Jane. They were all into it. And she knew darn well who Darcy was. His saying something, and of course, she wasn't even supposed to hear this. He's drug here. He knows he's got the biggest purse of anybody that's there. He knows that all these girls are looking out at him as the prize pig, and they all want him to dance with her. And now that we know about attachment, we know that he is not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
He is distant emotionally. So he's got his own little baggage that he's bringing into the ball. And Elizabeth doesn't know that either. Okay, so Elizabeth is hearing this, and then she needs to think of, if that is true, I will be living as a prostitute and a pig swaller because I'm not going to be able to get a man.
Yeah.
If I am not handsome enough to ask to even dance,
yeah,
what's going to happen to me? Seriously, what is going to happen to me? I've got to find a husband, and it's sure not going to be Mr. Collins.
Right.
So you walk away going, okay, is that true? Is that false? It's so much easier to live in a state. There's something wrong with him. There's nothing wrong with me because now I have to protect myself. I can't have my mind thinking that I am not pretty enough. The results of that are not good. And that day and age, you needed money.
I had no idea that denial was one of our most frequently employed psychological defenses.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That really does distort our perception of reality.
Absolutely.
And if we're all walking around in denial, refusing to accept information from the outside or even from our own emotions and feelings, boy, we're dealing with not as full of information as we really should be. How does a person get around that?
Well, it's hard because you're living in a state of denial. Quite honestly, and Darcy is too, because he is not in tune enough with his own emotions to know that he is coming off so aloof
Yeah,
and so irrepressibly snobbish,
yeah.
but he's not in touch with himself emotionally either. Why the heck would he think that Elizabeth would want to marry him? Talk about state of denial. On what planet did he think he was making any kind of a romantic connection with her?
Yeah, yeah, good point.
Bingley denies that Jane adored him.
Yeah,
He would accept Darcy's statement of no, she's not into you. He accepted that over Jane dancing and dancing with him and smiling and being the way she was.
and she gives another good example of Mr. Elton in denial about Emma's feelings about him. He proposes to her, and he totally misreads her interest in him. She's trying to hook him up with her friend Harriet. And the same measure, Emma is also completely misreading everyone in her community as well, imagining love matches where they're not love matches.
You think of like
It's
Emma,
hilarious.
like, oh, she didn't have enough to do or something, to stir all this stuff up. But here's another denial. What about Edmund from Mansfield Park? His sense of denial in seeing his love interest, Mary Crawford.
Yes.
So he was choosing not to see some big flaws in her character.
So blind.
And that's a sense of denial too. Oh, she's perfect.
Probably both you and I have had friends who you think, oh my goodness, what does that person see in that other person? How are they so blind to, maybe they're not as bad as Mary was, but that they're so blind to that is just not a good match for them.
Right.
But you're in love and you just don't assimilate all the information that you could.
Yeah, love is blind is what they say, and that's true.
Yeah.
And that's infatuation. When love is not blind, then that's true love. When you're able to see someone's faults and you love and accept them, even though, then that to me is when that gets to this is true love because I'm seeing the person with all their warts.
Yeah.
When Darcy sees Elizabeth, and we don't know if she looked like Keira Knightley. That's a bold statement thinking that she's not the most handsomest person in the room because
Right.
she's exquisite. But
Yeah.
probably she didn't look like a Keira Knightley. But to me, that's when I think of love and I think of colorblind because I do believe love is blind is parenting too. I accept that person no matter what. And it's hard for me to see from a mother's point of view. Yeah, she sees the whole thing, but there is still such acceptance and so much love that you overlook it.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess before we close, Nance, all of these things, whether it's attachment or denial or love is blind or all these different things that we talk about, what's cool about neuroscience is that they all connect. So love is blind is sort of denial, but what does that do to attachment? And then what does that do to this other area and fight and flight? We didn't even talk about that. But all of these things come together and create the person that we are. And then we've got societal's influence and all of these other things. But no matter where you are, no matter how you were raised, no matter any of this, the beauty is that what we put in our bodies, the messages that we give ourselves, all of that stuff can change.
Yeah.
And how liberating this is now because we don't have to stay in that space. We can learn how to change our brain waves. We can learn how to change our thinking. We can change actually our brains now. And this is such exciting news for our field to realize that through mindfulness and self-talk and some of these and good therapy to help ease the wounds and see a broader perspective as we see in all of these fantastic characters, that life can get better.
Yeah.
Thank goodness Marianne gets off the bed and finds love. And Darcy becomes more of a approachable human being.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all change and grow. We can all develop better brain patterns and and more complex brains and
Yeah,
higher
yeah.
functioning, and we can even control fight or flight. We can control our bodies now. Our bodies aren't controlling us. We can learn how to come back from panic attacks and all sorts of things. It goes on and on and on. It just blows your brain away just thinking about all this stuff. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to Wendy when she joins us next time.
I know. I'm going to love every bit of it. I'm so excited.
Well, I suppose we should wrap up now. Just a reminder that all of our listeners can get in touch with us by going to our website at frontporchbookclub.com. And there you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter. There's information about how to subscribe to the podcast. And you can also send us messages about any comments you have or books you might suggest, pretty much anything.
Our episodes come out twice a month, the first and third Wednesday of every month. If you like our show, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, Nancy, about Jane on the Brain.
Oh, this was really fun.
I have just adored this book. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited to talk to Wendy.
I'm feeling very positive about our ability to change and grow. So I definitely appreciate that. And yeah, I think Wendy's going to be great to talk with.
Okay, well, Nance, I'll see you next time.
Okay, sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye.